Shields and swords, feel the wars, fighting my blood down to the core. Warriors from medieval age, fear the reign of night brigades. Crusades into the room, moving through the temples and tombs. You scared and place, prepare to face Professor Awesome and the minions of doom. 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 Professor Awesome and the minions of doom.
Let's talk about Chretien de Troyes' Arthurian romance Cligès. Now, Chretien is such a complex and fascinating writer that just like his other Arthurian romances, there are different readings of this and some controversy over how to understand it. But one thing I think that most people agree on is that it is in some way connected to or commenting on the story of Tristan and Isolde. Now, if you don't know the story of Tristan and Isolde, I'm going to summarize it here very briefly. I want to be clear. There are many versions of the story of Tristan and Isolde. Many versions, many of which are great literature. So it's not a story that has one literary version. I can't just recommend one to you, but there are multiple great versions of this story. And if you start reading them, you'll find, if you read one, you haven't read them all for sure. So I'm not going to do it justice here, but just a short version. It's the story of a love triangle. There's Tristan, Isolde, and King Mark. And Tristan is the nephew and or adopted son in some way of King Mark. And King Mark is going to marry someone. It's a political marriage named Isolde or Isolde, right? And so he sends Tristan to go pick her up and bring her back. Well, on the journey, they fall in love. Now, there's often a lot of complicated stuff. Sometimes they've already known each other. There's war. Sometimes there is a dragon. Sometimes there's a tournament. Sometimes there's a magic potion. Sometimes there's a magic potion that only works a temporary amount of time. So like I said, there's lots of versions, but somehow they return. Tristan and Isolde have fallen in love. And this sets, and then Isolde marries King Mark because it's necessary politically. And this sets up this love triangle where Tristan owes allegiance to King Mark, but he also loves Isolde. Isolde owes allegiance to her husband, King Mark, but she also loves Tristan. And of course, King Mark, owes allegiance to his wife and also to his nephew, family member slash subject, right? And there are lots of interesting and clever stories. It's maddening that I can't talk about them, but this is really about Cligès. And in the end, they're usually found out in the end, and they have to separate. Often it ends with the death of Tristan, and usually Tristan, and sometimes Isolde dies as well, having tried to live apart. Those of you out there who right now know the story of Tristan and Isolde are probably screaming at your screen saying, why didn't you put in this detail, which is one of my favorite details from one of the versions? Sorry. But if that love triangle sounds familiar, here, after reading Cligès, it should sound familiar because, it is in many ways a similar story to what we have here. And from the very beginning, Chretien overtly connects it to the story of Tristan and Isolde. And Finis keeps saying over and over and over again, I don't want to I don't want to be like Isolde. I don't want to be like her. I don't want to be like her. I don't want to be considered an unfaithful woman. So in order to understand this, I think we have to understand a little bit about the role of adultery in romance. Adultery, we would normally think of as bad, and it definitely is. But often adulterous love of some kind, sometimes a chaste adulterous love, sometimes an unchaste adulterous love, is often considered the kind of pinnacle of courtly or romantic love. And that might sound weird to us from the Middle Ages because you might think like, well, there was no divorce. So, how could this have, or there was divorce, but it wasn't as common as would be today. And so, what does this, how do you square this circle? Well, in fact, it's the fact that they could never be together. that there's never a possibility that the adulterous couple can be together, that enforces their constant separation, that increases their suffering, that then is the thing that makes us go, this is a kind of ideal love because they're suffering for it. And again, you don't have to go too far. Look at any romance movie that has ever been made, and anyone that's any good at all, the heroine and hero suffer because they can't be together until they can or not, depending on how the story wraps itself up. And so it's weird that she keeps saying, I don't want to be seen as a bad woman like Isolde, because Isolde is not really considered a wicked or bad woman. Their love is a kind of ideal, though tragic love, most of the time when it is told. So what does all this mean? Why does he keep referring to the story of Tristan and Isolde over and over again, either as the narrator or through the voice of his characters? Why does he suddenly stop in the middle of the story and just start talking about the relationship between fear and love? What's all this about? Well, some people have argued that the story is a negative critique of Tristan and Isolde. It kind of demonstrates that that immorality ultimately hides under this veneer of courtliness. Like, everyone's acting like this is chivalric, everyone's acting like this is courtly, but you're really sleeping with another man's wife. That's what it comes down to. And I think there's a good case to be made for that. That's not my reading, but I think there's a good case to be made for that. However, I do think, first, he argues, well, the ideals of chivalry went from Greece to Rome to France, and that now they're in France. And there's a sense in which he's suggesting, I think, that this is a kind of ultimate version of chivalry. And also the fact that even though she keeps saying that Isolde is bad, we don't really see people treating her as a villain in the different medieval retellings. I don't think that the idea of a negative critique is very convincing. Instead, I want to suggest a different reading, and it has to do with the position that Finis is in. So the major plot point here is not actually the turn is not actually like in Tristan and Isolde, where the two lovers see one another and fall in love with them. That is definitely an important point. But the turn actually happens before that. And it happens because in this case, unlike the story of Tristan and Isolde, where King Mark is supposed to marry Isolde, in this case, Elise is not supposed to marry Finis. He's not supposed to marry anyone. And by deciding to get married, he's violating his word. And he's taking something that doesn't belong to him. Perhaps even worse from the perspective of a story like this, which really contemplates love very seriously. It's not that he's really fallen in love with her. This is very much a political match for them, right? And so he is usurping the position that Cligès is supposed to come to when he comes of age. So in marrying her, he's taking Cligès' kingdom. He's taking Greece. And so Finis exists in some ways as the embodiment of Greece, which Elise has usurped. So, in fact, Cligès is the rightful ruler of Greece, and because he is the lover of Finis, and Elise he's never actually had sex with her, he's not the legitimate husband of her. It is just a dream, literally, that he's the legitimate husband of her. In the same way that it's just a dream that he's the legitimate king of Greece. And so when ultimately, in the end, when everything ends and Cligès and Finis can be together, Finis kind of rises back from the dead in a way that we're going to see a lot in a lot of Arthurian romance. She doesn't literally rise from the dead, but it's like that. Cligès is returned to the throne. He gets the throne that he was promised. He gets the woman who's his, and everything is put more right. And I would argue then that rather than saying that this is about the immorality of Tristan and Isolde, it's a critique of that critique, because it's saying, like, yes, we look at the story of Tristan and Isolde, and we say, like, these are people who are engaged in adultery. What they're doing is wrong. But here we have a sense in which, no, there's something legitimate about it. There's something legitimate about their adultery, that the real adultery is the usurping of his place, of Cligès' place, both over the kingdom and the woman with Elise. So I would have a much more positive reading of this. But once again, those who disagree with me, those aren't crackpot readings. Those are legitimate, very readings that are held by very legitimate and meaningful scholars. I just think that the one that I'm suggesting to you holds water a little bit better. So what do you think? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your reading.